Hey everybody, John Malanka with United Patients Group. Be informed and be well. This segment is brought to you by Aspen Green. Aspen Green is just a handful of USDA certified organic hemp and CBD brands, and all of its hemp is grown from the perfect topography and climate found in Colorado. Check out why purity matters at aspengreen.com and follow them on social channels at Aspen Green CBD. Use promo code UPGCBD for 20% off. Welcome back, everybody. John Malanka with United Patients Group. Be informed and be well. And today I have a very special guest. Maybe you've seen her, maybe you haven't, but you're going to really enjoy this interview and this podcast. It's my dear friend, Bonni Goldstein, MD. How are you doing, Bonni?
Doing great, John. Thanks.
Always great to have you on, and thanks for what you've done for the industry, what you've done for Corinne and I over the years, and you're continuing to do. So, can you share your bio? I mean, you have a pretty impressive background, how you become where you are and who you are here in the cannabis industry and beyond.
So I trained as a pediatrician at Children's Hospital a long time ago. Do I have to say how long ago?
No, it's okay.
Okay, good. And then I went into the practice. I did some critical care transport, which was a really fun, adrenaline-filled job when I was very young after my residency. And then I went into pediatric emergency medicine, and I did that for almost 14 years. And then I left the practice, I was burned out. I was working a lot of night shifts. I had a young son at the time. I was trying to balance motherhood and work, and I wasn't sleeping for many years because I was working at night, and I took time off. Just like I figured a few month leave of absence just to kind of regain my sanity and my sleep schedule. And during that time, a friend asked me about cannabis, and that was kind of my introduction into medical cannabis. At that time, I knew nothing. I had not learned anything about cannabis certainly not during medical school or residency. Never heard of the endocannabinoid system. And I started researching, and I just couldn't believe what I was reading. Like, how is it possible that cannabinoids kill cancer? They're potent anti-inflammatories. They help with this incredible large array of symptoms, and yet here I am, a doctor, thinking I'm healing people, and I don't even know about this plant medicine, even though in my state it had been legal at that point for at least 10 years, at least for medical patients. So I began the journey of educating myself, and I went to every conference and I read everything I could read, and I started working in the field in 2008, and then worked at a few different offices, and then got hooked in with Canna Centers, and then this particular practice in LA went up for sale in 2011, and I purchased the practice, and I've been there ever since. I really do have a passion for taking care of children, especially training as a pediatrician. So I've really focused the last 5 to 7 years on pediatric cases, children with treatment-resistant epilepsy, autism, cancer, psychiatric illness, GI illness, autoimmune, you name it. If cannabis might be able to help a child, I try to help them.
Yeah, and so your niche, and I'm glad you said that, has been, you have the whole gamut, but you're really, your niche, you spend a lot of your time with, and what you're known for, especially is the pediatric world. And so thanks for doing that. And then the state, you said your state, for everyone, Bonnie's in California, but you do consult with patients all over the world, or I know you're.
Well, so the new rules are you have to be a California resident. Okay. So I'm kind of sticking with the rules. And if somebody has California residency, I do try to
accommodate.
Stick with the rules.
Yeah.
I don't want to get in trouble. Yeah.
Rules, a lot of rules.
Well, when you have a medical license, there is somebody that's handing you that and is watching you. Yes. And you are, which I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, I have, unfortunately, have talked with adult patients and also pediatric families who have been getting advice from someone that I believe to be not only not helpful, but potentially dangerous. And there's no accountability because the person is giving medical advice outside of an established, relationship that is somewhat controlled. And what I always tell people is, you know, buyer beware. If somebody's trying to sell you something, be very careful. And I do think in a way that's a good thing. I don't sell anything to my patients. And so I do think that, you know, like when people ask me, what's the best oil, John? The best oil is the oil that works for you.
Totally.
Whether it's this company, that company, or that company. Everybody who makes oil thinks that their oil is the best, of course. And I would be shocked if someone didn't take pride in what they do. When you grow these plants and make your products, you get very passionate about it. And I get that. But at the same time, we have to realize that it's not one size fits all for all these, for all these patients.
You know, I think you made a good point, because that's when Corinne and I started United Patients Group. That was one thing that we prided ourselves on is, you know, you need, you know, talk about it. And by the way, you need this, here it is. And I think that's why we have been brought into other states and our government talk, because we're not, we're giving just, you know, helping smooth the roadmap out on what questions to ask, what to avoid, who to speak with, you know.
Right. I mean, resources. Resources.
And I think that's why people come to us and say, you know, because of that, that's why we listen and we trust. Pandemic, what's happening with you in this pandemic? Well, let's go back, because the laws have changed a lot. Man, I know you and I have talked about this, and I know a lot of people in the industry have gotten upset with me for saying this, but the reason I say this is it was voting this for adult use for 2018, because I voted no, Corinne voted yes, because I've seen what it's done to the true cannabis patient, I shouldn't say true medical patient, but the medical patient that wants guidance from a medical doctor. And you're someone that had the effects of it hurt your business, right? I mean, it's because people aren't wanting doctor recommendations anymore. And I'll just go down there and, as you mentioned, getting some advice from someone else who really is a medical professional. So I'm a big fan of recommending a doctor should be involved.
Right. Well, you know, I think I fully believe that adults should have access to this plant. And I just don't think that the law that we passed was the right law.
Yeah.
And part of that was because they included medical with the recreational, and now medical patients are being taxed very highly. And I see that many of my patients cannot afford medicine from a dispensary. So I'm not against, quote, legalization or adult use. I'm over 21. I am against the way that our government lumped everybody together. Medical patients, you know, you do not pay tax on your Viagra, your Prozac, or your antibiotics. Why should you pay tax on your medical cannabis? Many of the families that I take care of already are struggling financially. When you have a child with special needs or a severe or complex medical condition, it is very costly. Insurance doesn't pay for everything. So now your child, let's say, doesn't respond to all these different medications that the doctors prescribe, and lo and behold, they respond to cannabis. So now you're going to be dinged, because that's the one thing that your child responds to. Believe me, these families would love to go to the pharmacy and just pick up a prescription covered by insurance. They did not choose cannabis to be what their child responded to. It's what their child's responding to. And why not? That's a good thing. It's natural, minimal side effects, and so on. But to tax these patients the same way in general, I mean, the tax is not that different between recreational use and medical use. And I think that's shame on California, shame on the legislature here, and shame on the people who instituted that. It's a terrible way to treat sick people and our vulnerable population. And think about elderly too, fixed income, and you're going in and your taxes are like 25%. That's just ridiculous.
I remember the first time we went to Colorado, we walked in there and I bought a few items. Next thing it was $125. And I said, no, we just had, they said, tax. I said, what's the tax? And it was 21, 22.
I think in Colorado it's quite high as well. But again, on recreational, on medical patients, it's about a third.
Yeah.
But here in California, it's not that much different. But going back to your statement about somebody in a dispensary giving medical advice, I have heard all kinds of things that families have told me or adults have told me about what they've been told in a dispensary. And we have to remember, that they are selling products, they're told to push products, but also the people that work in dispensaries, look, they're all very nice people, you know, my bud tenders, yay, but they are not qualified to treat, to give medical advice. Yeah. When somebody says anxiety, that is not, it's not one word. Why do I spend an hour with a new patient? If I just hear anxiety, why don't I just go, here you go, and be a 5-minute visit? But it's not like that. You want to get the whole story so you can understand this person, how they react to other medications, what they've responded to before, what's been their experience with cannabis, what have they tried, what kind of dosing, what kind of timing. I mean, all of these questions are extremely important because that helps me determine at least where to start. I once did a consultation for a woman, this is going back a few years, who was so very mentally ill in my office. And I kind of, after talking with her, I came up with a regimen to begin with, knowing full well that we have to see her response. And then we make determinations of the next steps after that. Like maybe if this doesn't work, we try this. But she went into a dispensary and she, I guess, must have said to somebody there, oh, Dr. Goldstein mentioned that I should try this ratio. And the person behind the counter went, for anxiety? Oh, I wouldn't do that. And just completely undid my hour-long intake. And all they heard was anxiety. That's it. And so they didn't know that she had 30 panic attacks a day. They didn't know that she had already tried high-dose CBD that did not do well for her. So the reason I gave her those, again, it's not one size fits all. It was, I based my recommendations on what she should take on this very in-depth discussion. So to walk into a dispensary and say, I have pain, what should I take? I mean, you may get lucky and it'll work because cannabis works great for pain. And I hope, hopefully people will get lucky. But if you're not getting anywhere, or you really have a serious condition, a medical condition, and you're thinking about weaning off other medication, or you really want instruction, see somebody who's knowledgeable in this. It can make a big difference.
It can't, you know, because people always call, you know, this worked for my family member. You know, I want the same thing. And I said, it's not a one size fits all. And that's why I truly believe a medical professional should be involved to spend an hour, you know, take that intake. Why is this? Maybe you can say, you know, are you not sleeping? Let's work on your sleep. And maybe the sleep will be the domino effect of helping your sleep, your depression, anxiety, anger, stress. I want to talk about COVID and see how that's affected your business, but well, let's go there because I want to talk about, you're talking about insurance, and I wanted to get into Epidiolex as well for patients that are going through that. But COVID, I mean, we're all sitting at home, you know, doing this at home. How's it affected your personal life? How's it affected your business?
Right. Well, I'm a homebody anyway, so I think personally it hasn't affected me that much, except for, you know, being able to visit family. Professionally, a lot of the conferences that I had planned for this year, in fact, all of them were canceled and have gone either virtual or rescheduled, which in a way has been kind of nice to not travel as much and to just be a little bit more of a homebody. We are working on the garden in the backyard, and I just got my greenhouse delivered, and we're setting up a greenhouse. Awesome. So very excited about that. In terms of my practice, everything's just, we switched to telemedicine, and we're just going to be doing it either, you know, through Zoom, Skype, or phone, which I think, you know, look, I cannot have patients coming into the office and potentially getting sick because the population I take care of is highly vulnerable. Lots of cancer patients, kids with epilepsy, kids with autism, again, also adults that have medical conditions, autoimmune, and so cancer. I don't want anybody getting sick in my waiting room. I don't want them in the elevator in my building. That elevator freaks me out. I just think we have to rein it in. And so that's how, you know, I've been affected. I think for some people, you know, the cost of cannabis has become prohibitive if they've lost their job and they're just trying to pay for their rent and their food. Again, going back to that high tax. In California, I know that those taxes are driving the underground market for sure. I think we all of us in the industry know that there's a pretty healthy underground market still flourishing because of those taxes. But I'm hopeful still that one day cannabis will be covered by insurance. And we just also have to have the ability to study it, because until we really have the freedom to study it, and again, if people don't know, it's still all cannabinoids, including CBD, are still Schedule 1. Epidiolex got a different schedule. So it's CBD from the bottle of Epidiolex. That's on a different schedule. A doctor can write a prescription for that. However, still all the other cannabinoids are still a Schedule 1. And unfortunately, Schedule 1, we're prohibited from studying the benefits.
Can you talk? I always say there's about 140 cannabinoids, and you hear everywhere from 120 to 160. Are you in?
About 140 or so, sure.
Yeah. And can you share a little clip note version what a cannabinoid is? Because people are like, cannabinoids, what is this?
Right. So we talk about different cannabinoids. So endocannabinoids are the cannabinoids, right, that are humans and other creatures make, our cells make what we call endo from within. Endocannabinoids are, for lack of a better term, inner cannabis compounds. There's one called anandamide. There's one called 2-AG. 5 have been determined to exist, and we think actually there's about 13 or 15 different compounds in our body that act like endocannabinoids. And these compounds exist to help our cells send balanced messages. Then we have phytocannabinoids, PHYTO. Phytocannabinoids come from the plant. So the cannabis plant specifically. So we've got THC and CBD and CBG and THCA and THCV and CBDV, and I could go on for 140 of them. But those compounds exist in the plant, and they're mainly in the plant as deterrents to anybody that might want to prey on the plant, like insects and deer and so on. So they play a role for the plant. Our endocannabinoids play a role for us in terms of helping us to maintain balance. So let me give a good example of maintaining balance. If you get a head injury, we know that your body and your brain releases endocannabinoids. So like if you get a big clunk on your head, like a football player getting hit really hard, there's an impact that causes inflammation and your body goes into protective mode. And endocannabinoids are part of that protective mode where they're released so that there's less inflammation, there's more antioxidants to pick up free radicals, right? And we know that in cases of people who have, let's say you have the beginning of Parkinson's, your body kicks in some endocannabinoids. In cases of cancer, we know your body kicks in endocannabinoids to help fight cancer. It's really your endocannabinoid system is this protective physiologic system. And it's crazy because it was only discovered in 1988. 1992 was the first, the cannabinoid receptor was discovered in 88. 1992, scientists discovered the first endocannabinoid. Think about when your doctor that you go see trained. Did they learn about this? Well, it's still not being taught in medical schools, but like I was already through medical school when this came out. I didn't learn about it till years and years later, as I mentioned.
I don't think they're learning about it. Some are learning about it even now.
I think they say 8% of medical schools actually teach about the endocannabinoid system. But I do think that the new kind of crowd of doctors that are coming out of medical schools they live in a world where most states now have some form of a medical cannabis law, whether it be CBD only or like California, full medical and full adult use. And it behooves all doctors, though, to learn about these things and to be aware of it so that, as far as I'm concerned, it's just another tool in the toolbox. It should not be a last resort medication. But certainly when we make it costly and out of pocket, sometimes that's what ends up happening. But anyway, so we're talking about these cannabinoids. There's also, we have to remember, synthetic cannabinoids. Those are made in a laboratory. They can be whipped up. If you are a good chemist and you know what you're doing, you can put together some carbon, some hydrogen, and some oxygen and create some synthetic cannabinoids. They're mostly used for research. Some are on the like spice or K2, which are synthetic cannabinoids that can be
Would you consider Marinol synthetic?
Marinol is a synthetic cannabinoid. It is lab developed, yes. Now, Epidiolex, as you've mentioned, so if people aren't aware of what Epidiolex is, it's an FDA approved CBD rich, basically 99% pure CBD product, pharmaceutical product. It was developed by CW Pharmaceuticals. They began researching GW.
Yeah.
They began researching in, I want to say around 2012-ish, 2013, maybe a little bit, even before that, I think was on the horizon. And then went into clinical trials here for severe pediatric epilepsies. 2 conditions were initially approved, and then another third was just approved. So the first 2 conditions are what's called Dravet syndrome, a severe genetic epilepsy. And then the second one is called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is a condition usually diagnosed on a certain criteria on the EEG. These are severe. These are kids having 10, 20, 30, 50 seizures a day, usually in a month's time, thousands of seizures possible. It's extremely difficult condition for families to live with. The children suffer terribly, terrible burden on the family.
Yeah.
And now the latest condition that was approved was tuberous sclerosis, which is a condition where benign tumors develop, and if they occur in the brain, they can cause severe seizures. Yes, so it was also approved for that. And basically, what the product is CBD. It's plant derived though, so they extract CBD from the plant and then they put it into a package, a pharmaceutical package. Initially, I wasn't thrilled that it had sucralose and some denatured alcohol in it.
And the strawberry flavor, is that
strawberry flavoring? I mean, to make it palatable, although, I have lots of patients taking yucky tasting oil without any difficulty. Yeah. I do think that there are certain patients that respond well to it. And for those patients, I'm on board. And you know why? The financial burden is lessened.
Yes.
I posted something when it first came out on my Facebook page, and someone responded with, "Why are you promoting this crap?" And I thought, that's really interesting that somebody would ask me that. Anything and everything should be on the table for a child who is suffering. Natural whole plant cannabis does not work for every single child. I have some families spending close to $30 to $50 a day on cannabis medicine. That is very hard to sustain. I don't care how rich you are, that gets really pricey. And people say, well, why are they spending so much? Because some patients need very high doses of CBD in order to stop seizures. In fact, so one young man I'm helping right now, we just increased his dose to 900 milligrams a day. That's what keeps him seizure free. And when we go under that, he has seizures. And by the way, that's in conjunction with 2 drugs that weren't working. And when CBD was added in, it definitely helped. Now we're seeing seizure freedom.
Yeah.
That's really important to him.
It's not a one size fits all.
It is not. There are some patients who are seizure free at the other end of the spectrum, and then everybody in between. But my point being with Epidiolex is that it's at least worth a try if you're unable to escalate your dosing, or in a child's case, a child's dosing because of finances, right? Yeah. I do have some patients taking Epidiolex as their base. So they have a certain amount of CBD, and then we give whole plant oil on top of that. And that combination has worked really well for some of my patients, but it allows the family not to have to have to hold up that big financial burden.
I was probably like the person that wrote into you, because I was like, when Sativex came on the market, also from GW Pharmaceutical.
Right, not in the United States, though.
Not in the United States, and so everybody started, we'll replicate it, 2.75 CBD, 2.75 milligrams of THC, it's a 1-to-1 ratio, and so a lot of companies replicated and had success with that. And then Epidiolex came on. I said, here we go. The pharmaceutical companies are getting involved. So a friend of mine, her daughter they're down in Southern California near you, and she is the daughter's 20, but a functioning autistic, but with epilepsy. They tried the cannabis plant for the past, because of conversations like this, and they were hit and miss. You have the same company, different matches. So I hope one day it'll get to the point where, every time you take this, like pharmaceutical or Tylenol or going to a certain restaurant, every time you order that same exact thing, it's the same exact thing and result. And they weren't having that. It was up and down, up and down. So I think twice a year they go to UCLA for their neurologist, and she gets hooked up and has her sleep patterns. And they asked about, the doctor said, well, I'm not convinced cannabis is the answer because of federal illegal. And she said, Epidiolex. And he said, what's that? It's a federally approved, write us a prescription if you're into that.
Sure.
Okay, so she made them write a prescription, covered by insurance, and I think she was able to get it 100% covered by insurance, and it's working.
Yeah.
And
so why wouldn't we want that? Right.
And I became a believer that, like you said, if something works for a child or an adult, do it.
Right. And one thing we know, though, is, and I'll tell you, it's coming from plant-based medicine. So I know, look, everybody asks me, and people want long-term studies. Well, we have thousands of years of people using cannabis and nobody's really dropping dead. Okay. The question is if I give it to a child, what are they going to look like in 20 years? Well, we don't know, but I do know what prolonged seizures does to a child's brain or to an adult's brain. Seizures versus cannabis. It's a guess, but I'll go for cannabis every single time, being the safer bet over seizures. And by the way, this idea of long-term, well, we don't know long-term. They approved Epidiolex without long-term studies, period. We know, so clearly they're okay with that, right? And part of that is because of the history that we have as humans on this planet, alongside the cannabis plant, knowing that there are, thousands and thousands of years of cases of people using cannabis long-term. Look, I talked to people who, yesterday I did a renewal for an older guy who's a Vietnam veteran. And he said, I've been using it since the war. He's fine. He has no medical conditions. He's in his, I want to say late 60s, and he doesn't take any pharmaceuticals.
Perfect.
He's doing really well. At this point, I think that we would see something if there was something to see. And again, it's not perfect, but why is cannabis being asked to be perfect when we have this whole medical community filled with pharmaceuticals that are not perfect?
It's, I've had the Maddox family, Casey Maddox, and his family, and their son Sawyer, and they're from Georgia, and they contacted Corinne and I years ago, and their son has Deuce syndrome, and that's another rare seizure disorder. I think about 250,000 children in the U.S. have it every year.
It's very rare, yeah.
Very rare. And he was having 200 plus seizures a day and blown up like a Pillsbury Doughboy, a helmet, bruised everywhere. The whole house was padding.
Yeah.
Anyway, they contacted us, and I said, well, California, you can come out here at that point, meet with a doctor, become a legal patient. Make a long story short, they became a cannabis refugee, but it was working. And so their doctor back in Georgia said, there's no proof, there's no studies. And Casey said, look at my son. He's running around. He's playing baseball. They live in California, Santa Barbara area. He's top of his class. He has friends.
Right. He has a life.
He has a life. And they just say, he always laughs. He says, I told my kin back in Georgia, if John Malanke ever come, you're always welcome. He says, but it just see that, well, it's like there's no proof, there's no studies. Like, look at my son.
Yeah. Right.
Look at my son.
What we call the N of one.
N of one.
And unfortunately, kind of the pharmaceutical model, the business model for drugs in this country, cannabis doesn't fit it. It's polypharmaceutical by design, by Mother Nature. When somebody says to me, I bought this bottle and it stopped my child's seizures, or it stopped my child from being aggressive, or an adult says my chronic pain is gone, and the bottle says THC and CBD, let's say, in a 1-to-1 ratio, there's also hundreds of other compounds in that bottle, as you know, right? Whole plant. So we don't really know what's working, but does it matter if somebody's better, if somebody's able to wean off? How is it that we stop looking at, how patients respond? I was at a conference where a doctor spoke after I spoke who said, patient reports are not evidence. And I will tell you, at that point, she did not have any friends in the room. And I understand what she's saying from a purely scientific standpoint.
Yeah.
That I get what she's saying. It's still anecdotal. But the N of 1 has to be part of the way we assess cannabis. And it has to be part, because we do not have the time in our lifetime to take every compound out of cannabis to see what it does and test it on a whole bunch of people. You're talking about generations of research that, first of all, we've been held back from doing. But even if we started doing it today, it would take years and years and years. And why do I have to show that when I've got little kids walking around where a parent says, my child went, like I have one family I just, checked in with, the child she was born with a brain malformation. She's never gone longer than, I think, 3 weeks without a seizure. We're at 2 months right now.
Isn't that beautiful?
It's something to be celebrated. Yeah. I don't know how long it will last. I don't know if she's on the right oil yet. It's a journey. It's not a here you go and it's magic miracle medicine. It's not that. But how is her going 2 months, the longest she's ever gone, even though she's been on 7 or 8 previous medicines? She doesn't know what she's getting. How is that not evidence?
Yeah. You made a great point, not magic medical evidence pill. I share with, because everyone thinks, I've seen it work and I've seen it not work. And so I don't want people to think this is the golden pill, the magic medicine. And I never use the word cure, and I'm not a doctor. I say healing and helping and benefits and bringing back to life. You must get that every day. Please, Dr. Goldstein,
Yeah. Well, so recently I got an email that says you're our last chance to save our child. And so that's, I don't know that cannabis is going to help. We're going to try. There's nothing wrong with trying. That's what they did for this child with chemo and with various types of surgeries and whatnot. The way I look at cannabis is just like any other treatment, in that is you give it a try. If it's, and again, benefits, risks. To me, except in certain cases, the benefits usually outweigh the risks. The one thing I know about cannabis is even if I accidentally overdose you, you're going to be okay. It's just a matter of a few hours for it to wear off. And in general, we're not really doing any harm. Now, one thing that people, though, should be very aware of, though, is that CBD does interact with numerous other pharmaceuticals. CBD is processed, metabolized, broken down in the liver at what's called the cytochrome P450 system. So we have this enzyme system in our liver that takes drugs and breaks them down, right? So a good analogy, so if you drink a lot of alcohol, your liver breaks down alcohol, but it can break down into this compound that builds up if you drink too much, and that's why you have a hangover the next day, right? So some drugs are broken down into what we call inactive metabolites, and then your body just gets rid of them. But CBD is broken down at this couple of particular enzymes, and about various numbers, 60 to 70% of other pharmaceuticals are broken down at the same enzyme. So they're competing. Here's the bar stool, the last one left in the bar, and you've got CBD aiming for it, and you've got a drug aiming for it. Who gets the bar stool? So what can happen is that CBD can either speed up the metabolism, pushing that other drug to be cleared out of the body, which means then it's not as effective because there's less in the body. And the analogy for that is women who take birth control pills are told, if you're going to take antibiotics make those hormones clear out of your body quicker. You can get pregnant while you're on antibiotics because your birth control is not as strong. Okay, that makes sense. So that's the analogy of the speeding the drug out. And I've seen that with certain immunotherapies, these new immune treatments for cancer. I have a patient who was taking an immunotherapy, And they told the family, expect X, Y, and Z side effects. The child got none of them. And so when I looked up, when the mom called me and said, hey, you know what, I'm expecting to see a rash or to see this and that, and I don't see it. Do you think the CBD could be interacting? When I looked it up, yes, they compete. We stopped the cannabis, and lo and behold, within 2 days, she had all the side effects. So clearly CBD was clearing that drug out of her system. People might say, well, you know, why aren't they using cannabis only? Well, we've been using it for 8 years, and we've kept the tumor from destroying this child's life.
Yeah.
But here's a drug that might work. It's shown some good results. If the family wants to try it, let's try it without cannabis in the way. It goes back to my favorite saying, rule it in or rule it out. All right. So we took her off cannabis. As much as I want her on cannabis to be protective, her last scan showed 50% reduction of the tumor, which cannabis never achieved for her for whatever reason. It helped, no question, allow her to have a good life. And I think it did help shrink the tumor to a point. Now we can look at the other side. What else does CBD do to drugs? CBD can cause the drug to not clear out in the way that we expect, and then it builds up. And if you get that buildup, you can get toxicity from that drug. And that can be from blood thinners to chemotherapy to immunotherapy. So it's important anybody taking any medication really should have kind of look and see if there's a drug interaction. And I just did a lecture on last week I was invited to speak at a virtual conference for a group of cannabis pharmacists. And let me tell you, they are wicked smart. They know their stuff. The people that are really interested in this whole cannabis and drug kind of interaction, while they've created databases and so on. And so this information's available.
Yeah.
Just as patients, have to know who to ask. And certainly it should be something that everybody does before they just go haphazard on cannabis. Now, again, I just want to point out, usually the drug interaction with CBD is if CBD's at a relatively higher dose. It's not on low dose THC, low dose CBD.
I'm glad pharmacists are involved. And do you remember you spoke at one of our conferences
yes.
at a pharmacy school? I think that was back in 2015 or 16, and they were one of the first. And I'm enjoying seeing these pharmacists finally coming on board and doing that. And thanks for talking about the drug interaction. What do you say for the patients that say, I want to try this, and if this does not work, then I'm going to go. Then I'll try cannabis.
Well, I think that's a reasonable approach. I think, again, anytime you're facing a medical condition, whether it be mild, moderate, or severe, having information is power. So you kind of have to have an overall view of, what is conventional allopathic medicine recommending for me? Okay, is that something I'm willing to do? Is it something I'm not willing to do? What does cannabis allow, right? Yeah. And so, as you know, I just rewrote my book, Cannabis Revealed, and it's coming out next month. It's called Cannabis is Medicine. And the publisher is Little Brown Spark, so I'm very excited about that. But in that book, I talk about this is the latest science on this condition. What studies do we have? Because everybody's going to say, oh, there's no research. There's not enough research. There's a ton of research. But the whole point is, what does the research show? Is the research meaningful? There was a study where they gave people with schizophrenia 1 dose of CBD to see if it did something. Well, since when does 1 dose of medicine fix things? I mean, here and there, I suppose, but rare. So to me, that's a silly study. Sorry, that's my opinion. I don't expect 1 dose of CBD to do anything to anybody, right? But they did that study. What about the other studies for that, let's say for schizophrenia? What do those studies show? The studies show that high dose CBD is an antipsychotic. It can help patients with delusions, with hallucinations, with clarity of thought, with enjoying life, with having positive emotional feelings. I'm helping a family right now with a young adult who unfortunately had a psychotic break when he was 16, which is on the younger side. And we're now about 4 years into using CBD, high dose, expensive.
What's high dose to you? Like you said, 900?
He's taking 800 milligrams a
800
day.
milligrams?
He's on 800, yeah. He takes 400 in the morning and 400 in the
Yeah.
evening, and it has changed his life. Now, he still takes one other antipsychotic because he found that that helped, but we got him off. He was on 4 medications when we met. He's off 3 that he hated and his parents hated giving to him because, you know, when you read about the side effects and so on. But he also, remember, a lot of people who have this condition, they feel better on the medication, and then they start to say, well, I feel better, so I'm good, and the side effects I don't like, so I'm going to go off my medicine because I feel good now. And then what happens is they end up in the hospital, and then they end up back on medication, and it's this terrible cycle. This young man, I'm happy to say, has not been hospitalized for, I think, 2.5 years, which is the longest he's gone since his diagnosis. I am so pleased with that. And we really believe CBD has played a big role in helping clarity of thought and the antipsychotic benefits and so on. I can't remember why I brought him up, but the point is that you have to look and see, what does the research say? If the research is bad research, it is what it is. We can't use it. But we try to glean from the research what, you know, may translate over to human, you know, actual human response. A lot of the mouse, research in mice and rats and so on.
Rodents.
It's so, all this animal data, it's very intriguing with cannabis, right? And then the question is can you translate it over? And again, for patients that are in desperate situations, I always say it shouldn't be last resort, but I do look at it as, if we know it's safe and you're being medically supervised by a fairly, I'm still, even though people say, oh, you're a pioneer and all this, I'm a conservative physician. I'm careful. I look at everything that the patients are dealing with and try to make the best possible safe decision. It may not work, but I know it's going to be safe under my medical supervision to try. So why wouldn't we try it?
Nowadays, everywhere you turn, everyone's talking about CBD, and you're doing that here as well. But I know that you also recommend THC, and I don't want.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Absolutely. 100%. Sure. Those 2 conditions I mentioned, John. So epilepsy and schizophrenia are 2 of the conditions that have shown response to high dose CBD. Again, not in everybody. Look, I've got some patients with epilepsy who are, you know, I still follow many of my adult patients from years ago. They have a vaporizer, they take a few puffs of THC, they don't have their seizures. THC is an anticonvulsant. Now, for a severe pediatric, like a specific kind of epilepsy, it may not be the right medicine. And again, even under the umbrella of epilepsy, under the umbrella of cancer, under the umbrella of mental illness, you're going to find different cannabis regimens are required for different people. We can't go, like you said, we can't go by the condition. We have to go by the human who has the condition and their response.
Talking about I'll say 140 cannabinoids, and it's funny. My brother's in the wine business. We're in California, and so for you to use that example of the bar stool with the CBD, with and the other medication, I started laughing because internally I wasn't laughing at you, because I always use that. And as you know, you can go out and drink 3 bottles of wine, and of course you're going to get, like you said, you have that hangover, and you know, the buildup in the liver, and you're going to be totally intoxicated, drunk, throwing up in most cases. Or you can have your sip of wine and enjoy it. And the same thing with THC. More is not always better. So can you talk about that as well?
Yeah. So THC is a great compound. There isn't a good cannabinoid and a bad cannabinoid, as Dr. Russo says. THC is a cannabinoid. It is what it is. And it has its role. There is no question that it is, for many patients who have suffered with chronic pain, that it is necessary to get a good result. I can't tell you how many people have come to me and said, well, I've tried really everything under the sun in the CBD market, this strain, that strain, this product, high dose, low dose, and my pain is still there, it's not working. And it's because they probably need a little more THC in the mix to help. Studies show that the combination of CBD and THC in kind of, lower ratios seems to help nerve pain much better than all CBD or all THC. The biggest problem with THC is that there are some people who do not like the intoxicating effects, and they just assume that if they take THC, they're going to be intoxicated. And that is a myth. There are many patients who take low, non-intoxicating doses of THC who reap the benefits. It's a matter of finding your dose. Yeah. Everybody has what I call a ceiling dose of THC, and that is the dose at which they're intoxicated. Some people like that feeling, some people don't. But if you know that, let's say, 7.5 milligrams gets you to your ceiling, you want to stay under that. And if you said to me, well, I take 6.5 milligrams of THC and it doesn't help my pain, then I would say add in another cannabinoid, looking for what we call that entourage effect or synergy. Recently, there was a study in mice that showed that the combination of THC and CBDA, the raw form of CBD before it's heated up, so you have a genetically dominant plant with that CBD dominant by genetics, and in the raw form, if you make a powder out of it or an oil, a juice it, whatever, don't heat it up, it will stay as CBDA. They showed in this study that what they thought a therapeutic dose of CBDA would do, a therapeutic dose of THCA would do, but when they did combination, subtherapeutic doses of CBDA combined with subtherapeutic doses of THC helped those animals with pain. And that's interesting. Why would the combination? Well, there's synergy there, right? And remember, like I use the analogy of a tug of war. I either can have the largest, biggest bodybuilder guy, one guy, or I can have a bunch of kind of not so strong, but a bunch of guys on my team, or gals, I should say. And so when you have the synergy of the phytocannabinoids and also the terpenes that are present, you can see a benefit at a lower dose. And so it's important to understand that THC should always be part of somebody's regimen. And in general, if you're using whole plant, from a dispensary or even if you buy online. Now, a lot of things do say THC free. There may be a reason that you have to do that. Maybe you get drug tested. Maybe you remember a bad response from way back when to THC or something like that. But in general, a little bit of THC, usually, a milligram, 2 milligram, 3 milligram is not really going to harm anybody and not really cause an intoxicating effect. And I have found that having that little bit in there, even in someone who says, I really don't want much THC, just having that little bit in there can be very helpful for pain, chronic pain, anxiety, sleep, and so on.
Can you talk about that, how they all each have a role? And that's interesting, because I'm starting to see a lot of products out there with the two acids, CBDA and THC.
Sure. Yeah. So we have to remember that CBD and THC are the two most studied phytocannabinoids. So we can say a lot about those: anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-cancer, anti-convulsant, helps with pain, nausea, vomiting, appetite, and so on. Okay. When we look at some of these other compounds, CBG, there's not a lot of studies. There have been a handful, but it's not a tremendous. And many of them have either been done in the lab or in animals, and we don't really have CBG in studies in humans. But CBG, we know, is an anti-inflammatory. It's an antidepressant. It's an anti-anxiety. It's an analgesic. And so the big question is does that translate from those studies where we make these claims, okay, in this study we found X, Y, and Z, does that translate to humans, right? And sometimes it does, and for some people it doesn't. What's interesting about CBG is that I have given it to children with autism or recommended it to children with autism, and we're seeing in those kids significant anti-anxiety effects. Now, not all of them. For some kids, it's overstimulating and aggravates their anxiety. I've seen some kids where parents have said they've started CBG and their previously nonverbal child started putting words together better. And the question is okay, is that developmental? Is it just happening, or is it really correlate to the CBG? And there are families saying it correlates to the CBG. There are other cannabinoids, like we talked about THCA, the raw form, and then I've already mentioned CBDA. Those are potent anti-inflammatories. They're potent anti-nausea. What's interesting about the raw forms that have the A at the end is that they appear to be very potent in low doses. So they found that CBDA has like, let's say a 1 milligram dose is equal to about 100 milligram dose of CBD for nausea in an animal model.
Wow.
Yeah, so CBDA has this incredible potency compared to CBD for nausea. Again, in an animal model, wouldn't it be nice to get adults who have nausea as one of their issues and test them? And we could do a trial to see how much CBDA is necessary to help with nausea. You know, as it is, I have recommended it, and I've had patients respond to CBDA and THCA in low doses, usually under 20 to 40 milligrams. Yeah. And remember, when talking about CBD, I'm talking about sometimes hundreds of milligrams. THC is very interesting. It just has a pretty narrow window of, before you hit that too intoxicating effect. CBD has this really wide range therapeutic effect, and I usually say 10 to 20 milligrams all the way up to hundreds and hundreds, as I've mentioned. So CBD can be frustrating because we start low and then you have this huge range of dosing. No wonder it takes a long time. And I'll share with you, John, that like 99% of people who come to my office and say CBD didn't help me, I dial in on what they took and how long they tried it. And they took a low dose and they only tried it for a very short time. And there is no question that CBD, you have to go. If you don't feel anything, you didn't take enough. One thing people should realize is we only absorb about 4 to 20% of these cannabinoids if taken sublingually or swallowed, ingested.
Okay.
If you're taking THC oil and you take 20 milligrams, you're only getting about somewhere between 4 and 20% of that 20 milligrams. That's a teeny tiny dose. So remember, just because
what's the rest doing?
It's just passing through.
Through your body?
Yeah. So, and that's what we call bioavailability, is what is available in the body. And what most people don't realize, though, is that we do not absorb these. There are products on the market that have claims. They usually say nanotechnology or something like that, where the molecule's been wrapped somehow for better absorption and so on. My thing with those is that there are families of mine who give those products to their children because it kicks in quicker. The big question is, let's compare. Let's at least try to do a study so we can see what are the levels in the bloodstream in the same human, right? So if you test it on 5 people, say, oh yeah, it worked quicker, that is not a study. So we really should do a study on that to see if that is something, because those products are usually slightly more expensive, but they also have more ingredients. And I did have a child have a severe allergy, like hives head to toe, after trying one of those nano products. And we don't really know what it was that caused the allergy. So we just have to be careful if we're going to make claims like that.
Speaking about hives, a lot of people, not just kids, are allergic to strawberry. Why would Epidiolex go with the strawberry flavor?
Yeah.
I asked them about that. They really didn't have an answer.
I don't even know if it's real strawberry, though. It might just
their answer was taste for the kids can take it. Mention, hey, I've had other patients that have can stomach the taste of cannabis. We're a few more minutes here, and I appreciate your time. You were talking about CBG and anxiety. A lot of patients that I've talked to are very sensitive to CBD, and sometimes do you see that induces anxiety in some of your patients?
Well, so CBD is not known to cause anxiety, and so usually what I will share with people is that might be, if they're taking it for anxiety, it may be that they're just having their typical anxiety and their anxiety is untreated.
Yeah.
I usually will tell people, if you are taking CBD and not getting the anti-anxiety effects, you are not taking enough.
Okay.
That's the first thing. So you must, again, to my favorite statement, rule it in or rule it out. You need to rule in or rule out higher doses. It either works or it doesn't. So you should titrate up on your dosing. However, there can be what we call biphasic or bidirectional response with phytocannabinoids. So what does that mean? That means that at low dose and at high dose, you can get a completely opposite effect. So THC in low dosing can be very anti-anxiety, but as we know, if you get too much, you can be really anxious, paranoid,
yeah.
and hide behind your couch for half a day waiting for it to wear off, right? CBD is also biphasic. In low doses, CBD can be overstimulating. CBD is an alerting compound. It is an upper in low doses. So people who say, I took 10 milligrams of CBD and went to sleep, that is a placebo effect. I mean, I never say never, but I'm pretty sure that's a placebo effect. Because first of all, the amount you're getting is only at best 20% of that dose. But also a very tiny dose, it should be alerting. It should not be sedating.
See, and that's where I fall in, because sleep is so important to me. And one time I didn't take enough CBD at night, and you know what? 2 in the morning,
Awake, right? CBD
awake.
in higher doses. Yeah. So remember that biphasic, low doses alerting, higher doses more calming and sedating. And so, and again, where's the line? Well, that's very individual. Your line may be 50 milligrams. My line might be 200. It just depends on our chemistry. I don't know how much you're absorbing. I don't know how much I'm absorbing. So we have to, look, we have to be free to study this so that I have the answers, right, to these questions. But at the same time.
Plus, if I had a late dinner,
did you eat something with, like high fat food has been shown to enhance absorption. So if you take a scoop of peanut butter, when you take your cannabis oil, you will likely get a little bit more in your bloodstream.
Oh, I love
if you are fasting, right? If you're fasting, we know that it can kick in a little quicker, but it won't get as high in terms of your bloodstream. So there's all these little nuances to it all. And so it's lots of variables that we're working with. And again, it's not one size fits all, but we have to remember that I always tell people, if you take cannabis, whatever you're taking, THC, CBD, CBG, THCA, CBDA, and you don't feel the effect as you're taking it, bump up the dose. And our dear friend Dustin Sulak, Dr. Sulak in Maine, he says, start low and go slow, and don't be afraid to push it. Don't be afraid to go all the way. Push the dose. The only compound that might make you feel badly is THC. So with THC, just take it easy. I tell people to increase for adults in increments of 2.5 milligrams. So 2.5, 5, 7.5, 10. In children, we do 1 milligram, 2 milligram, 3 milligram, 4 milligram, because we don't want to escalate. And again, it's a narrow window. You're eventually going to find your ceiling dose very easily, and probably sooner rather than later. But CBD is different with that big, wide therapeutic range.
Do you know on Sadivex's guide of dosing, it's pretty much like that? Go low, start low, go slow.
Start low, and
this is
titrate up little by little. And one of the biggest things, if I could share with people, is be patient. I said this to somebody yesterday. This is not a harsh pharmaceutical. This is not magic. This is going to take time. So if I'm out of shape and I hit the gym tomorrow, am I in shape tomorrow? No. By the time I notice muscles, it's going to be at least 6 weeks. By the time somebody else notices, it'll be 3 months. We're asking a plant to help with what ails us. And sometimes those are very serious ailments. And yet we have this expectation that's going to do it like immediately. And it takes time to find the proper product that fits your chemistry, to find the proper combination of cannabinoids that works.
And can you talk about even how you bring it into your body? Some people have success with vaporization,
sure.
Smoking,
you have to try different ways, absolutely. Yeah. And when people say, well, what's the best way to take it? Well, again, it's like the best oil, what suits you. Some people find that inhaling is the only way that works for them. I have other patients that say, I take like 5 mLs, which is like a teaspoon, big dose of THC, and I don't feel it. How come? You may be a poor absorber, right? It's not getting into your bloodstream. So it's important for people to understand that when you venture into the cannabis medicine and into a regimen, that likely what you're starting with, unless you're really lucky, is not what you're going to end up on. And just to accept the fact that you're going to try different things If you really want to give it a go, you got to be willing to try those different products, and you also have to be willing to give it time. I wrote a story in my book about a patient who actually is someone in my personal life. She's in the book. And she suffers with severe autoimmune disease, was diagnosed with IBS, fibromyalgia, migraines, you name it, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, all this stuff. It took about 8 months. It took about 4 months for her to say, I feel better. And it took about 8 months for her to say, okay, now I feel like how I felt before I got sick. That's a long time. But remember, her endocannabinoid system after 10 years of chronic illness was completely out of whack. And it's not going to snap in like this. Now, if you're lucky, it might, but for most people, it takes time. And that's the one thing I try to tell people is this is not magic. It's science, just like everything else, but you have to give your body a chance to respond. And it's natural. It's from Mother Nature. It's going to take time.
I want to get into COVID as well.
Oh, sure.
But talking about, this patient you were just mentioning, I'm certain she was on a bunch of different pharmaceuticals as well. And, that's our gut is a major part of our body. Can you talk about natural, bring the body back to balance, why sometimes it takes longer for others?
Right. So the food you put in your body is crucial to your health. Doctors, I will just share with you as an MD, we learn nothing about nutrition, nothing. I mean, maybe some people, younger doctors have learned a little bit, but I literally got in 4 years of medical school, a half hour on vitamins, and that was it. Nobody ever talked about anything. The microbiome, the environment of your gut is crucial to your health. There's now even a specialty called nutritional psychiatry, because the food you eat affects your brain. Okay, the gut and the brain are connected. They are not. It's not like there's a line here.
Yeah, there's a documentary called "The Second Brain."
There you go. And I actually think it might be the first. It might be the first brain, right? Yeah, and so the food you put into your body matters. The food that Americans eat is, as you know, terrible. I myself have had to make some big changes because I was starting to get some medical conditions for which I could start pursuing, but they're all conditions for which there really is no, quote, easy treatment. And I figured, why would I go do that if I can control the food that I put in my mouth? And it's not easy. I'm gluten, dairy, egg, sugar free. It is not easy. Sometimes I open the refrigerator and then I close it back up, because I can't deal with, okay, I got to come up with something to eat. It's not easy. However, all of my conditions have subsided. And so, I should say my symptoms. And so it was, and again, it took a few months of going through the course of, making sure that, and look, I tried cannabis first and cannabis didn't reverse it. And part of it was because I was still putting the offending agents into my body. That's the one thing. If I'm poisoning myself, I have to stop poisoning myself. So the microbiome is incredibly important. And remember that our gut is filled with cannabinoid receptors. The intestines have they are a very good target for cannabis treatment. And I include, for people who are dealing with like autoimmune, leaky gut, that kind of thing, you must include some of the raw cannabinoids so you can get all those great terpenes before they're cooked out, and not to mention THCA and CBDA, which target some of those receptors in the gut. It's really important that that people realize that they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah.
It's just what are doctors now finally saying? Eat more plants. Well, here's a plant that you should include, but also include a lot more plants and try to minimize really the processed food. It's, if you read a label and like they say, if there's something on there you can't pronounce, you probably shouldn't put that in your body, because it's disrupting the balance in your gut, which is key to your health.
Cannabis is a daily supplement, putting it in your body. You're talking about you had a short course in medical school. Do you recommend patients taking this as a daily supplement, a daily vitamin?
You know, so the way I look at it, John, is this plant was taken away from us back in the 1930s and 1940s. And it was, made illegal, and it was vilified, and it created fear in the last number of generations that are here on earth with us. And I just look at it and say, if that didn't happen, where would cannabis be right now?
Yeah.
We'd all be growing it in our backyard and throwing it in our kale smoothies.
In our new greenhouse. What are you going to be growing in the greenhouse?
Yeah. But think about everybody's walking around with these green drinks. Well, why aren't there cannabinoids in there? They're good for you. Now, you may not need a whole bunch of them because if you're don't have a severe illness or a medical condition to treat, but on a daily basis, they augment and supplement your endocannabinoid system. And I believe to help keep your endocannabinoid system kind of balanced. And remember that anytime we have chronic stress, hello, everybody out there right now, right? Your endocannabinoid goes out of balance. All those bad nights that you don't sleep, those tip out of balance. The food that you eat that's not healthy, you tip more out of balance, right? So to me, I do think it is worthwhile. And if people can grow their own and juice it and drink it, that is a great way to supplement your endocannabinoid system. I know that's not easy to do because it takes time and effort. And even though they call it weed, to grow good cannabis can take a little bit of effort. But at the same time, to get a bottle of some companies sell a mixed, like very low THC with some CBD, THCA, CBDA mix blend. Sure, a squirt of that every day. I don't think it's going to harm you. I do think it might help your endocannabinoid system kind of stay in a balanced way. What other things can you do? Yoga, massage, exercise. We make our own endocannabinoids from healthy fat. What if doctors been telling us not to eat for the last 30 years until the ketogenic diet kind of became popular or paleo became popular? We were substituting fat with sugar. Then what do we get? Hypertension, obesity, heart disease, all kinds of terrible
the whole word, yeah.
Diabetes, the whole thing. And now everybody's saying, oh, I'm doing a ketogenic diet, I'm paleo, and I feel better, I lost weight, my blood sugar's better. You're also supporting your endocannabinoid system by providing your body with healthy fat that your cells can then use as ingredients to make your endocannabinoids. And so all of those things kind of together, to me, they're all puzzle pieces to good health.
Good. Going to COVID.
All right.
We can end on this here.
I'm going to share some research if that's okay.
Yeah, but people are going through some major things right now. I mean, it's affecting mental health. I think everybody's going through, being quarantined, not being able to get out. When they do get out, it's high stress, depression, anxiety, anger. And so can you talk about, and I don't know if your studies are going to talk about cannabis and COVID, or what are they?
Well, the studies that I'm going to mention, there's 3 particular studies that shows the preliminary evidence supports the use of phytocannabinoids to help fight COVID. And so I'm not saying that if you get COVID that you should go to your doctor and say, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do, I'm going to do cannabis instead. I'm just saying that these preliminary studies support further research, and certainly people who are already using cannabis, I have heard of people saying, oh, I stopped using cannabis because I'm afraid that I might catch COVID. I understand. So smoking and vaporizing right now, definitely smoking should be minimized or eliminated so that your airway immune system remains intact to be able to fight any viral particles that you may come in contact with. But let me just share with you. So in 2015 at the University of South Carolina School of Medicine, some research is being done there on the anti-inflammatory and the effects of cannabis, meaning THC and CBD, and also looking at how cannabinoids affect human immune system, or I should say animal immune system, because they're not allowed to study it in humans, but they're ready to study it in humans if we could get Schedule 1 status changed. So in 2015, they took mice and they gave them a bacterial toxin that triggered what's called a cytokine storm. A cytokine storm is when the body goes into this massive inflammatory immune cell response where the immune cells are releasing all these chemicals that create inflammation to help fight the infection, but it's like an over response and it actually can harm the host. Okay. So a cytokine storm, it sounds what it, it says what it sounds like, which is like, oh my gosh, crazy, out of control immune system, cytokines, those pro-inflammatory compounds, which then leads to a condition called ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. That is what people who end up on a ventilator, who have COVID, that's why they end up on a ventilator. They have ARDS, okay? So cytokine storm leads to ARDS. This is a well-known process from not only COVID, but from other conditions. So they gave mice this bacterial toxin that induced a cytokine storm. By day 5, all of the mice that were untreated developed ARDS, and by day 5, they were dead. 100% mortality. Then they had a group of mice where they gave them the toxin, and they gave them intravenous THC, which you can really only do in a lab, but they gave them a dose of THC on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And on day 5, 100% of the mice were not dead, 100% of the mice were alive. When they looked at the mice, sacrificed the mice and looked at them, they had less cytokines in their bodies and in their lungs, and they had less inflammation. We know cannabinoids are anti-inflammatory. I'm not surprised by this research. So now the question becomes is, if somebody who is quite ill with COVID, can we prevent cytokine storm, which then ultimately prevents ARDS? And I don't know, but certainly that study gives a hint to it. Now there's another study.
What doses were that? I mean, was it high dose?
Well, they were relatively high dose in mice, like 20 milligrams per kilogram through an IV, which there is a translation to human, but of course I would never recommend anybody, do not inject THC. It's not sterile. Don't inject it. This was laboratory sterilized, isolated THC. So that is not available to people, right? Now, another mouse study just published last month, they found CBD to minimize the cytokine storm, and that basically protects the lungs, and it reestablishes, what it does is it takes this hyperimmune inflammatory cytokine storm and just brings it back down. So what did I say in the beginning? Cannabis helps maintain those cellular messages. Stop sending so much cytokines. Don't send the message of inflammation. Okay, and I'll just read you their quote, potential for CBD, a potential protective role for CBD during ARDS that may include CBD as part of the treatment by reducing the cytokine storm, protecting pulmonary tissues, and reestablishing inflammatory homeostasis. Okay, and remember, these are preliminary studies. These are not.
Was that also IV, and was that also in?
You know what? I'll have to check. I don't think so. It might have been. I'll have to double check.
But also in South Carolina School of Medicine, in South Carolina.
Oh no, this is different. This was from another group. And then there's a study from Israel that came out this month, which is actually, I don't even think published yet. It was just reported in an article, and I sent you those links so you can share them with your listeners. CBD plus a specific terpene combination treated life-threatening cytokine storm and was more effective than CBD isolate, going back to our synergy and entourage, right? And also more effective than a steroid, a pharmaceutical steroid commonly used for that condition. So that is very preliminary evidence, but why are we not allowed to study this so that we can come up with dosing? When would you need to start treating? How long would you stay on it, right? Like all of these questions need to be answered. But the bottom line is that cannabinoids, no question, may play a role in helping to protect people from the full-blown COVID, but also potentially with recovery. Remember, we're talking about these people that they're calling long haulers now, people who have months, they test negative, but they're still very ill. Maybe some anti-inflammatory phytocannabinoids are indicated in those cases.
It's tough, I don't know if do you know Dr. Chintu Sharma?
I don't think so.
He's also a medical director of a hospital out in Maryland. And he was the same thing. We don't know the long-term effects. We don't know. He goes, we're seeing so many different types of, bless you.
Excuse me.
Bless you. So many different types of patients and what they're coming into the hospital experiencing. Some have, a light fever. They test for COVID. Some don't have a fever, but they feel pain.
Sure. And some people are getting GI stuff. Some people are getting skin. Everybody, it appears, is getting heart problems. I mean, there's this extensive range of disease being, long-term disease being caused by COVID, the clotting problems. We're only at the beginning of understanding COVID. So we don't really know yet what this disease, we have not witnessed the full course of disease for COVID. And that's something that we definitely have to know in order to be able to make the proper decisions. Right now, I err on the side of caution. Why wouldn't you? It just seems silly not to.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a cousin who survived COVID, 8 weeks in the hospital, is very, very ill still. He's about almost 8 weeks out from being home. Yeah. And he's still very, very ill. I do not want this disease. I am not interested in this for anybody I love, much less any of my patients or even anybody out there, because you just don't know. If you're the one who gets it, you don't know how you're going to react to it.
There's recurrence. I was talking to someone yesterday, and someone at their kid's school has had it twice.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's one of our questions too, is now they're saying the antibodies are there, but we don't know how long they last. Again, we do not know the full course of this disease yet. The only way to know the full course of a disease is to live through it and to gather as much data. And thank goodness for all the scientists and researchers that are frantically working 24 hours a day to try to figure out so that they can give those of us who are waiting on them good advice. And I'm going to share, look, we're going to see conflicting advice coming out. But remember,
we're
already seeing it. We can only go by what we know as of today. And somebody may have a discovery tomorrow that will change what we did today. We have to go with the flow with that. It's kind of like saying, and you use the cannabis analogy, do I know everything about cannabis? No, there's like this much to know, and I think we know this much because research has been prohibited, and we do the best we can. When people come to me with cancer, I cannot say if cannabis is going to help them or not. I don't know, because I don't have enough research to say 95% of patients with this kind of cancer who get cannabis get this result. We have no idea. So, it's the same thing right now with COVID.
I appreciate that. Would you wear a mask?
I wear a mask, yes. Yeah. I wear a mask when I leave my house, when I go to the grocery store, when I go into my office to collect charts. Again, I do not want this illness, and that to me is, look, my colleagues in the hospital are wearing masks for 18-hour shifts, and if they can do it, I can do it to go into the grocery store and grab what I need and get out of there. That's my opinion.
And I say that because I talk about masks, and I've written about masks, and I have people have written back, why are you putting false information? I said, listen, if it's going to help, why not wear a mask?
Until we know for sure, we should err on the side of caution. I don't think there's really anybody out there that wants to knowingly spread cannabis to somebody else who could be quite ill or die.
Spread cannabis is what you said.
I'm sorry, I meant COVID. Sorry. Spreading cannabis.
I went over the hour.
Feel free to spread cannabis around.
There you go. Closing thoughts. I want you, how can people find you? One, but I want you, Bonnie's book is incredible. This is her second version. And, but can you talk about your book? I want people to be able to find it, pre-order it. How do they find it?
So they can go to Barnes & Noble or Amazon. I think there's a couple other websites. I'm sorry, I can't remember the other two, but it's called Cannabis is Medicine. It is available for pre-order. I go through the physiology of the endocannabinoid system. I go through what's in the plant. I go through the safety of cannabis. I go through a number of conditions for which you should be careful with cannabis. And that's, of course, pediatric patients with any type of cardiac conditions, pregnant women, people who may have another type of condition. So I go through that. And then I added a chapter. So again, this is like an 80% revision of my previous book. So some of it is a little overlap. Yeah. All the patients that were in the previous book gave an update on there. So here you now have, 4 or 5 years later of how they're doing, which is very exciting for me because that does show that patients can get long-term benefits. I have a chapter on kind of the science of how CBD works. Like everybody's raving about CBD, but can you tell me where it works in the body and what it does? And if you can't, that's what this chapter is about. And I go through every cannabinoid and what do we know about its interaction with receptors in the human body, because remember, all these compounds work at the within the endocannabinoid system, but they also work at external sites outside of the endocannabinoid system, and we have to be aware of that. So I put all of this kind of data that's floating out there, and I try to make it really organized and methodical in that chapter. And then there's a chapter called How to Use Cannabis as Medicine. How do I approach how do I know what products to try? How do I categorize products? So it's kind of a roadmap without giving specific, a person with Parkinson's should take this dose, because that is not okay for me to do. Because remember, and I'll use Parkinson's as an example. Parkinson's starts off one way, and as a person with Parkinson's progresses, their brain changes, their chemistry changes. And something that might be appropriate at the beginning of treatment, if you're in the beginning of the illness, may not be appropriate later on. So that's something that people should be managing with a physician's help. But in that chapter about how to use cannabis as medicine, it gives you at least a methodical approach. Rule it in or rule it out. How do I do that? How do I know when to say this product is helping or isn't helping? So I go through all of that. And then I have about 30 conditions where I go through the latest scientific information that either supports or doesn't support the use of cannabis for those conditions.
Awesome. And so can you repeat the title? And again,
sure. It's called Cannabis is Medicine, and it's available on Amazon for pre-order and also Barnes & Noble.
And I know you're busy. So are you still seeing patients?
I am still seeing patients. Currently, my practice is full. I am a bit overwhelmed. I am still taking pediatric cancer patients right now because unfortunately, by the time often they get to me, that we're at a critical point where I feel that I might be able to help or at least improve quality of life. But the practice is bulging at the seams, so I'm trying to, as best as I can, if somebody calls our office or emails us, we have a network of physicians, and as you do as well, so I sometimes even tell people to reach out to you if I don't know of a physician in the area. We try to refer to other physicians who are doing what I'm doing, and luckily there are now a handful of us across the country who are able to help patients and who understand cannabis and can at least get patients started on a regimen that might be beneficial.
Do you want to get bombarded and share your phone or website, or you want to just have them?
Well, so it's cannacenters.com.
Okay.
And there is a contact us page there. There's also, I'm on Instagram, although I don't check messages on Instagram, but if you want to follow us on Instagram, it's Bonni Goldstein, MD. And even though I have a Twitter account, I don't use it. And do not reach out through LinkedIn. I never check it. And there's too many things for me to be checking. LinkedIn is very low on the list.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you reach out, I'm not allowed to give medical advice unless I'm established in a relationship with the patient. That's the rules. I can't just kind of give out what we call curbside advice.
Yeah.
And the practice of my medical practice is regulated by the medical board, and I follow standard of care, which includes a history of physical establishing relationship with the patient. And there's only one of me, and I wish I could help everybody, but there's also Dr. Sulak, Dr. Hergenrather in Northern California. There's a wonderful doctor here in Santa Monica, Dr. Sherry Yafai. And there's Dr. Patricia Fry on the Maryland, Virginia area. There's some doctors in Florida that I know, in Colorado. So, you know, there are other doctors out there that are willing to help patients, that are leading the way, and hopefully we can connect people.
And we can do that, and you can contact Bonni at her office, or myself. I'm always reachable. I should say always reachable, but I am reachable, approachable. Both Bonni and I are approachable as well, and we're more than happy to help you on your journey. Can you, before we get off this, you're talking about in your book about roadmap, and one thing a lot of patients are afraid to do is have this conversation with their doctors.
Sure.
Can you just reiterate, it's, even if you're in an illegal state, it's not illegal to have that question?
That's right. So there is a precedent case, and if you want to look it up, it's called Conant versus Walters, I believe. And it was a case where the federal government went after doctors, basically saying you cannot have a discussion with your patients about a Schedule I substance, because it's in conflict with the federal government. Mm-hmm. And the case aired on the side, or voted on the side of physicians having an open, honest relationship with patients. And it protects a physician's speech. I have free speech when I'm talking to a patient. But under free speech, it includes that I'm not lying about it. I can't say if you come to my office and you're bald that cannabis is going to give you a, beautiful long, Farrah Fawcett hair. I'm not allowed to lie. What I can tell you, though, is there is evidence that shows that cannabinoids might have anti-cancer properties, or there's evidence that CBD can stop seizures. You're allowed to have the discussion, meaning physicians and other healthcare professionals. It is protected speech. And the reason is because it's a special relationship where I am not there for my benefit. I am there for the patient's benefit, and I am supposed to help that patient understand what their potential options are and the best course of treatment. If I want to talk about cannabis, but I'm afraid to, I've not done my patient a service, right? I have done them a disservice. So for what I tell patients is, a good question to ask your doctor just to feel them out, especially if you're nervous about it, is, what do you think about medical cannabis? And if they, it's a bunch of hooey and it's garbage and so on, then you might not want to get into it with your doctor. What you might want to do is educate your doctor in a very subtle way where you don't bruise their ego. What you might want to do is say, gee, I found this paper on, I have Parkinson's, and here's a study that shows that CBD might help Parkinson's. I brought it for you. I was wondering maybe you could read it and just let me know what you think, and just kind of leave it. Doctors, and we have big egos, and we don't like patients teaching us things we don't know. We're supposed to know everything. But the reality is that we have not been taught about this. And if a doctor hasn't gone out of their way to learn about it, they're coming from a place of ignorance. Whether it's willful ignorance or not, I leave that to them. But it may just be they didn't come across it. They want to know, but look, it's hard to be a doctor these days. If you're a cancer doctor, it's so hard keeping up with all the drugs coming down the pike. How are you supposed to learn be a cannabis specialist in there as well? So the whole idea is be gentle with your doctor, but try to help educate. I always tell people, buy the book, give them my book, or print something off the internet that talks about the endocannabinoid system and hand it to them. If your doctor says, well, no, I'm open about it, then you can have a conversation. They may not be able to advise you because you have to remember they don't know very much. And that is where, if you are seriously ill, or even you just want direction, why getting into a relationship with a cannabis specialist, whether it be a doctor, a nurse practitioner, or an RN who has bothered, or even a cannabis pharmacist who has bothered to learn about this, you will likely have a better experience.
Well said. Well said. Bonni Goldstein, MD. Bonni, thank you so much. Always.
You're welcome, John. Always a pleasure to see you.
And great seeing you as well. So everyone, Bonni Goldstein, MD, buy her book. This is John Malanka with United Patients Group. Be informed and be well. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Hey everybody, John Malanka with United Patients Group. Be informed and be well. This segment is brought to you by Aspen Green. Aspen Green is just a handful of USDA, that's right, USDA certified organic hemp and CBD brands. And all of its hemp is grown from the perfect topography and climate found in Colorado. It is a family-owned business and is deeply committed to the science of providing only the purest hemp and CBD products for the best results and most beneficial experience. Its mission is to bring the therapeutic value of pure, organic hemp and CBD to people who seek supplemental relief through the use of healthy, natural products. Aspen Green is free from toxins and runs up to 8 different lab tests from bona fide third-party labs throughout its product line. It holds in high regard 3 foundational principles that guide every aspect of their business, actions, and interactions with their customers, partners, as well as their community. These are quality, integrity, and transparency. These will always remain at the hearts of their efforts to bring their beneficial products to consumers. Check out why purity matters at aspengreen.com and follow them on social channels at Aspen Green CBD. Use promo code UPGCBD for 20% off. Again, UPGCBD for 20% off at aspengreen.com.